Welcome everyone to our webinar today, Behavior Training with Autism Learning Partners. We are recording today's webinar, so this recording will be available to our members to watch at a later time. Please make sure to mute your microphone and disable your camera. We will be having a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the webinar, and we'll be using the chat feature. So at the bottom of your screen, there's a little chat bubble, and if you have any questions that come up during the presentation, type them in there, and then we will make sure that they're answered at the end. So I would love to introduce Liesl Snyder. Liesl is a great friend and partner that we've been working with. She's the Associate Clinical Director for Autism Learning Partners, and she is a board certified behavior analyst. So Liesl, I will turn this over to you. I'm gonna mute and turn off my camera.
Sounds good. I've been working with people with behavior problems, specifically autism, but others as well for the past 10 years. And so this presentation comes to you with a lot of examples and experience. I also asked Sylvia early on to kind of ask members specifically about problem behaviors that you were looking for solutions to. So I have also included some of that in here as well. Okay, so problem behavior, we approach it in behavior analysis and the science of behavior as scientifically as possible. And I don't want to get too, I think, complicated, but I want to give you the basics of the way that we analyze and reduce challenging behavior and increase pro-social behavior. So today we're going to talk about functions of problem behavior. We're going to identify replacement behaviors based on function. We'll go over like reinforcement and removal of reinforcement, which includes side effects, and then we'll apply those concepts specifically to the questions you asked, but also I'll give you strategies and general ideas for addressing problem behavior as well. And you'll see as we address those behaviors kind of a pattern of identify function, create a replacement, remove function. So we will go over that. So the function of behavior. So the way that many people remember this is with the acronym EATS or SEAT. I should have put it on the slide, but I didn't. Access to tangibles means that the person, not just children, but people are trying to get items they want. An example of this in our own adult lives are things like we are trying to access money to get things that we like. I like to use the example of me always wanting to get a chai tea latte at Starbucks, and that is like my tangible reinforcer. I'll engage in all manner of behavior to get that tangible item. Escape and avoidance, trying to get out of things we don't want to do or getting out of situations that make us uncomfortable. Attention, trying to get peer or adult attention, and we all do that in our grown-up lives. We send text messages to try to get attention. We post lots of pictures on our social media, trying to seek attention. It's one of the things that we need as humans. Did somebody have a comment? Do I hear a voice? It's so hard with this. I think we're saving the questions till the end, so type in the chat if you have a question. And then finally, the last one is automatic/sensory is how we kind of refer to it. And that's anything that tastes good, smells good, sounds good, feels good, looks good to the person. What feels good to one person often does not feel good to another person. And we see kind of combined with this, and we'll talk about this in more depth shortly, things like PICA, which is ingesting non-food items, or self-stimulatory behavior. Those kinds of things are considered usually sensory based. So once we've identified the function of a problem behavior, we can find appropriate replacements for that. Hey, there's a behavior right there. An appropriate replacement. So we find appropriate replacements. What I mean by that is that we replace problem behavior based on its function. So for example, if a person frequently screams to get their iPad, which we see a lot with some of our clients, what we will do often is teach them how to say, iPad please, or I want iPad. That's an appropriate way to get what you want. And then we remove reinforcement for the behavior. So this would be in that same example, not giving the iPad for screaming. So teaching the appropriate replacement and then no longer reinforcing the problem behavior. The removal of reinforcement is called extinction. And so I'll talk in the next slide about some of the side effects and problems that are encountered when we put a behavior on extinction. So it's really important to pair the removal of reinforcement with a replacement behavior. This can decrease the side effects of extinction. So all extinction means is just no longer reinforcing what was once reinforced. And when a person no longer gets what they were getting, they can engage in all of these behaviors: increased aggression, emotional outbursts, trying to escape and avoid either the person or the situation or both. Counter control, this looks like kind of revenge seeking, trying to get you back. And then they can also, in trying to get their reinforcers, start engaging in new challenging behaviors. So an example that I always use it's a silly example, and then we'll talk about more like case examples for my own life, is that I loved this taco place downtown and called Chunga's, and then I got tacos there every week, and then they closed. And so my reinforcer of tacos was removed. That was my extinction. And so I started driving by every day to see if they were open. And I would drive up and I would look in the window and I would knock on the door and I would look up online. So I was engaging in all these increased behaviors. I was pretty emotional, I'm not going to lie. And I had all these new behaviors that I was engaging in. As the place remained closed and I couldn't access my reinforcers, I stopped going there. Of course, why would you? You're not getting anything that you want by doing all those behaviors, and those behaviors require effort. So I stopped going, and my behavior was put on extinction, and I found a new taco place. I will say that every once in a while I still drove by, and so even after a behavior is gone and has been put on extinction and you no longer see it, occasionally it'll come back. But if you continue to not reinforce that behavior, it will stay gone. I probably haven't driven by the taco place in 2 years. So my behavior is completely extinguished. Talking about from a more clinical perspective, things that we often see are with young children, they can learn to be physically aggressive to get toys and things that we want, or they can learn to have tantrums, and sometimes for really long periods of time in order to gain that reinforcement. And so we teach them to make appropriate requests. We teach them to take turns with other people. We teach them to wait. And then we don't give in when they are having a tantrum, when they're having physical aggression. And sometimes that can mean a really long time of waiting it out. But as long as you never give in, they will not keep engaging in the behavior because, again, why would they? They're not getting anything out of it. There's in behavior analysis, there is a rule called the matching law, and it says that we will make the same level of effort as the reinforcement that we receive. And so if we're making this huge effort to have physical aggression and tantrums and problem behavior, but we're not receiving any reinforcement, then our level of effort is going to decrease very rapidly. We will talk a little bit more about dangerous behaviors and how we don't want to put those on extinction. Maybe I'll just mention that right now. So behaviors like severe self-injury, severe aggression, if you put those on extinction, it can create a very dangerous environment for everyone, including the person. And so what we recommend in that case is what we call harm reduction, where we give really small reinforcement when the problem behavior occurs, but really big reinforcement when the appropriate replacement behavior occurs. So let's say somebody engages in physical aggression to get attention, and they push you, you give them attention, but you don't have an extreme expression on your face. You just say, please stop, or you totally neutral, calm. But then if they come and ask you for attention appropriately, you give them lots and lots of attention. Let's play a game, let's talk, let's have a conversation, as a way of kind of addressing those more dangerous behaviors. If you have specific questions about that, we will definitely talk about that more at the end. One person put on here, this is a lot, and I'm going to actually pull up the handouts themselves so we can kind of zoom in. And I'm going to send these to Sylvia, and she can send these out to you if you find them helpful. There are various strategies that help based on function. So these are replacement behavior and removal of reinforcement. So the things that we do in behavior analysis is we identify ways to prevent problem behavior from occurring in the first place. And then we create a plan to follow when the behavior occurs. What's nice about this is if you have a challenging behavior, a lot of times, and as a parent, I do this, we just react in the moment. And sometimes we just do what we've always, seen done, or the first thing that pops into our head, or however we think we can make it stop the quickest. And sometimes those strategies are effective and sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're really punitive and they come with a lot of side effects that we didn't maybe intend. And so having a plan and knowing exactly how you're going to address it beforehand can be extremely helpful in taking that emotion factor and that just guessing and throwing it out there out of it. So let's talk about these proactive strategies. I'm going to bring up my new thing here. Sylvia, do you want to tell me if you can see this?
Yes, I can see that.
Okay, perfect. Just want to make sure
Yeah, looks good.
Okay, sweet. So preventative strategies, things to stop problem behavior from occurring in the first place. So priming is kind of giving a warning of what we expect or helping the person get ready. This can be giving your child a warning of in 5 minutes, we're going to turn off the TV. A way that I often use priming is before we go into the grocery store, we review the rules, right? We say, okay guys, how do we act in the store? We don't run, we don't grab stuff, we don't put things in mom's face. And you can prime for any situation. What kind of voice do we use in the library? And practice it and model it with the child or person before you engage in the activity. And you can also use priming to remind them, hey, remember that if we're good the whole time we're at the store, we get a treat. So we can keep in our mind both the expected behavior and the reinforcer. Other things that are helpful, visuals. A lot of people with autism are very strong visual processors, and less strong with like receptive communication, understanding what we're saying. So visuals can be really helpful for this population because it allows them to see what we expect and also to know what's coming next. I've also used visuals with people with ADHD because it helps with that memory processing and remembering what's happening. This can look like checklists, schedules, tokens, that kind of thing. You can always make them, the most useful are usually for routines and charts, things that happen regularly. It's very hard to make a visual for something that's going to frequently change. So if you have any expectations that are a constant in the person's life, then that's a really good time to use a visual support. We also use visuals for things like cue cards, and we will talk about cues a little bit later on, and I'll show you a couple of examples. Peer rivals. Maybe we should call this something friendlier, but basically this is like our school teacher trick where we reward a child who's being good in front of a child who's not being good. I worked in a residential treatment facility that was locked down, and a lot of times if you call a person out on their behavior in that setting, they get really violent. And so we learned pretty quickly that a good way to like get a person to be quiet without telling them to be quiet was to say, I really like how Jack is sitting there quietly, and hoping that Joe will be like, oh, I want some praise too, I want to be quiet. This can work really, really well with siblings. And not only praise, but offering, rewards and special treatment to peers who are acting appropriately can be really effective in improving the behavior of a more difficult person behavior. Another quick example, my daughter hates taking medicine ever since she was a baby, and I cannot believe that a 4-year-old can out wrestle me with the prowess that she does, but she does. And I mean, we fought and fought her, and finally I was like, okay, I'm gonna think through this. So I got her very favorite treat, a sucker. And I was like, okay, if you take your medicine, you get this sucker. But if you don't, I'm gonna give it to your brother. And I have the brother sitting right there, super excited to eat her sucker. Took it straight away, fast as she could, drank it up. So these strategies can be really effective depending on the peers, depending on what kind of social, reinforcement you have available. Communication, this is a huge one, and it will be very surprising, I think, to understand how quickly learning to communicate can decrease problem behaviors. Even if it's communicating with sign language or a gesture or using a picture card or a communication device, teaching a person to ask for what they need stops a lot of problem behavior. We recently had a client who engaged in a very, very high rate of running away and physical aggression against other children and tantrums. And these behaviors would last a very, very long time. And we started teaching him to request help using sign language. And as soon as he would request that and we heard it, even if we couldn't give him what he wanted, his behavior would stop because he knew that, hey, we had heard him, we know what you need, and we're trying to help you. So teaching the appropriate communication response. If you have a child who doesn't want to do any work, we teach them to ask, can I have a break? Can I have a minute, please? Can I have space? If we have a child who needs attention, we teach them to approach a person and say, will you play with me? Will you talk to me? Will you sit by me? In whatever way that they are able to communicate. Reinforcement. So we do need to have a long chat about reinforcement, I think, because it's very easy to confuse reinforcement with bribery or when I say bribery, I mean that after a problem behavior has already started, we then offer a reward for stopping it. For example, if a child starts screaming because they want something and you say, if you stop screaming, I will give it to you, then we're offering a reward for stopping the behavior, and they learn, okay, first I have the behavior and then I get rewarded for stopping the behavior. So reinforcement should be premeditated, and you can do this by setting up just expectations in your household and saying, hey, when we are all done with all these tasks, that's when we watch TV, and we don't watch TV before that. Or, when you're done with that, you can go play with your friends. And that's our routine, that's our expectation. This can be more formalized and be made more visual with things like token programs. I have a lot of people who say token programs don't work. And it's true that some token programs will not be effective because there are a lot of variables. So if you're offering too much reinforcement, not enough reinforcement, if the ratio of how many responses are required to get a reinforcer is too high, we won't work for it. But if you think about it, money is a token program that we all abide by, because paper money itself is worthless, right? The paper doesn't mean anything. It means something because we can exchange it for reinforcers, for food and a place to live and, things that we want, tangible items. And so getting that good balance of ratio can sometimes take some trial and error, and it's very, very individualized. When we just bring up a little card with 5 things on it and then give a candy at the end, that gets old very quickly. So it's important to vary that and to individualize that, and to find a variety of reinforcers. If you think about money, we can exchange that for all kinds of stuff. We have tons of different things we can get with money. That's what makes it so powerful. And if we don't have money, we don't get our reinforcers, right? We can't just go to the store and say, I don't have money today, but I want my candy anyway. So not giving the reinforcer unless it's earned is critical, and having a wide variety to prevent satiation. Finally, follow through. And as a parent, follow through is very hard because you have more than one child, or you have a job and you have household chores, and you can't every single time Jack is screaming, you can't go and deal with it. You can't go in there and work with the child. So if you are trying to address a specific problem behavior and you know that you're going to be putting it on extinction, Find a way to get some help with that, or to set some things aside so that you can have the time and attention, because if we give in during an extinction burst, it will worsen the problem behavior. The way this looks is a person will engage in a tantrum to get what they want, right? And we don't give it to them. So I'm sure you've all experienced this in one way or another. They will tantrum harder to get what they want. If at that point we give in, they'll learn, oh, I have to bring it to this level now to get what I need. So if you're going to remove reinforcement, it will be important to set it up so that you can actually follow through. The other thing that we can be mindful of in prevention is if we give a directive, we make sure that we're not just giving directives that we have no intention of following through on. I'm sitting, a parent, I'm sitting on the computer, I'm working, and I'm like, go clean your room. and I know that there's no way that I'm going to go check up on it. So a better way to have a behavior that I want to see is that I don't give that direction at all, instead of giving it and then not following through on it. Because if we don't follow through, a person will learn to ignore us. Okay, and hopefully all those were clear and that you've written all of your questions as they've come up. We'll go over these consequence strategies now. So all of those can be used in prevention, and these are things that we can do. So what's really important is to identify the function of the behavior. One way that you can kind of experiment and do this is to see what will stop a behavior. For example, child starts screaming, you hand them candy and they stop, then you can say, oh, they were crying because they wanted access to that candy. So access is the function of their behavior. If they're screaming and they stop the second you pick them up, you can say, oh, attention, that was what they wanted, right? This is the function of their behavior. That's not always 100% accurate, but it gives you a good and quick idea of where to start. So consequence, if we know the function is access, and what we mean by that is trying to get tangible items. And I gave some examples here. We can start requiring appropriate requests, and this can mean teaching an appropriate request. Sometimes a person doesn't know what to say or how to say it to get what they need. And what's important about this is not expecting them to learn a very, very complicated request when they don't have the skill for it. We want them to be able to quickly and easily access what they want with appropriate communication. So if the person has no language in their repertoire, a good way is to help them do a sign. And if they don't have the motor skills to do the sign for food or drink or whatever it is, make a sign up. And something that everyone in that environment knows, if they make that sign, this is what they want, right? You've got to start where people are. A little tiny child, we can't expect them to say, excuse me, mother, I would like to have a piece of chocolate, please. We can't expect that. Teach 1 word, 2 words. And then another important piece of that, and this could probably go under preventative strategies, but that was a very long document and ran out of room. Teaching skills. So we know that it's access, and we know that we need to have an appropriate behavior. We need to also develop our other skills. Skills that people are lacking when they engage in problem behavior for access to items are waiting. So if we say you can't have that right now, and that causes a huge problem, we slowly teach them to wait for longer and longer periods of time. Another really important skill to develop is accepting no. We are all told no all the time, and we have to learn, even though we don't like it, none of us like it, to accept it. And so we teach that in a really slow way with a lot of reinforcement, and practice it until we can accept no in the natural environment. And finally, taking turns. Taking turns, sharing, that's difficult for adults. It's important to let people know that taking turns comes with rewards. And even though a little child might not understand the social rewards of taking turns, we can try to contrive that until those social reinforcers take over. And then most importantly, if the function is access, and I probably should bold this because it's so critical. If an item is is accessed, we never ever, if a behavior occurs for access, we never give access after an inappropriate behavior occurs. I know it sounds simple, but when you're on hour 2 of a tantrum, you're like, oh my gosh, just give them the iPad. Don't do it. Don't do it ever. So if a person grabs an item, you can either remove the item or block access to the item. An example of this is I had a teenager who would try to sneak into a classroom and grab the iPads out, and then he would stay on it all day. And so I'm not going to wrestle a 14-year-old in a school. I'm just going to put my hand in the way of the screen and say, hand me the iPad, please. And so we're blocking access to it. I've worked with children who will run out of their classrooms to try to go on the playground. And we just stand in front of the swings, we stand in front of the slide and say, nope, back to class. So those are ways to prevent access with those a little more like the trickier stuff that's harder to take away. A good one for electronics is password protection, maintaining the control of reinforcement. Okay, so if the function is escape, we don't want to do it. We see this a lot in school classrooms. There is a strategy in ABA called hand over hand, and that is where you are physically making a person do what you've asked. I personally hate that strategy because I think that other procedures work just as well and are less aversive for everyone. So basically, we can require that work is completed before we access reinforcement. So a lot of times, people will get out of a task and then they'll start doing a more preferred task, right? We work refuse, and so then we go to recess, or we refuse work and then we, go to PE or music or whatever it is that we prefer. And so requiring that, yes, you can do that after you've done some work is really important, an important way to prevent escaping a task. Following through, we discussed following through, and a lot of reinitiating demands, sometimes getting closer, physically closer to the person and saying, hey, I'm here, I'm following through on this task. Moving closer to them when you give the task is a signal to many people that, oh, okay, this person is following through and I have to get it done. And then the skills that we work on are asking for breaks, tolerating frustration, because tasks are frustrating, asking for help, and asking for more time are all things that can help with those escape maintain behaviors. If you've discovered that attention is the function, do not provide attention. Again with the, sorry, sounded like somebody said me. Again, with the function of attention, we have to consider those dangerous behaviors and how to minimize attention, but still prevent a problem behavior. We see this a lot with like property destruction or physical aggression. We have to intervene and stop that. And us intervening is a way of providing attention. There are ways to intervene that minimize attention. So you can stand in front of things and not make eye contact with the person and keep a totally neutral expression on your face. And that can at least minimize the attention that we're giving for problem behaviors. The best course is to turn away, walk away, look away, get out something else, grab your cell phone and start texting or start knitting. Make sure that you're not looking at the person or having a facial expression. Those are all ways to minimize attention. And it's really helpful if you have a second person in the environment that can tell you, hey, you're still making a face, or you keep looking at them. And so those things can be really useful, because sometimes we think, I'm not giving them attention because I didn't go over there, I didn't comfort them, I didn't offer them anything. You still may be giving attention. So it's helpful to have a second pair of eyes. We can also work on skills like how to get attention appropriately, playing with other people. Sometimes we are just lacking social skills and don't know how to get our need for attention met. And then another one is recognizing need for attention. this is not a skill that comes naturally, I would argue, for most people. We all, I mean, I'll send a crazy text message and I review it and I'm 35 years old and I'm like, why did I just do that? And I'm like, whoa, because I needed attention. You know, we stop and think, oh, I'm doing this because I need some attention. It's hard to recognize even as adults. So learning to identify that for a person who engages in a high rate of attention maintained behavior is really useful. One more story about the residential treatment center. I had a client, a child, who engaged in really, really high rates of behavior, really dangerous, concerning, you know, ingesting non-food items and that kind of thing, to get attention. And so we taught him to just approach us and say, I need attention. And at first we just dropped everything we were doing. We're like, okay, let's play a game. Let's go on a walk. Let's hang out. Let's do something. And his problem behavior decreased to 0. And it was an awesome strategy. And then we can slowly fade and say, okay, I'll give you attention in 3 minutes. I'll give you some attention in 5 minutes. I'll give you attention when I'm done with this task. And so I'm not suggesting that we, you know, always give attention no matter what if a person requests it. But at first, when we are teaching the skill and working on the skill, we should to reinforce that behavior. Finally, sensory. These are, I gave you the examples earlier of eating non-food items, self-stimulatory behavior. We all do things because they feel good. You know, eat foods because they taste good, all those things. Sensory is difficult because it's very internal. This is the only function of behavior that we consider not socially mediated, meaning that we don't control the reinforcement. We can't like internally change what a person experiences. So if we're engaging in a really problem behavior for sensory seeking purposes, all we can really do is block that sensation as much as possible or mask it, and then immediately introduce a replacement item. Some examples, you know, high rates of self-injury, we try to block that, or we try to, you know, put on a covering or something to mask the sensation and give an alternative. For self-injury, you know, like squeezing a stress ball or something that could reasonably give similar sensory feedback. People who ingest non-food items, sometimes we will give them something to chew on. We'll give them an alternative, you know, a food item that's kind of similar. Those kinds of things to decrease that maladaptive sensory seeking. For self-stimulation, you know, one thing that we do for skill development is teach a person when it's okay and when it's not okay. Because there are many situations where, you know, self-stimulation is fine. I had a little girl who engaged in a very high rate of hand flapping, and I do not consider hand flapping a problem. The reason why it was a problem behavior was because it was occurring for 135 minutes in a, sorry, excuse me, I need water, in a 180-minute session. And so she couldn't learn because she was so busy engaging in hand flapping. And so we started to teach her, hey, it's okay to hand flap, but not while we're learning our skills. So when she would start hand flapping during skill time, we would give her alternative behavior of clapping, and that reduced hand flapping enough to where it was no longer a problem, and she was doing it at appropriate times in appropriate places. Giving visual cues are really helpful. You know, some clients I've had will disrobe in public, and so we teach them, you can take off your clothes in your bathroom, in your bedroom, but you can't do that in the living room or at school. And some people find like a color system really helpful. If there's a red dot in this room, we can't do it. If there's a green dot, we can, and then fading those colors out. Hopefully that makes sense, or I can elaborate on that if you have specific questions. So those are our proactive and our consequence strategies. I'm going to go over the specifically requested, let's go here and bring up our slideshow again. the specifically requested examples here. So this was what I received from Sylvia that people wanted to specifically know. So understanding personal space and boundaries. This is an example of a visual, and it can also be used as a cue card. So you have to think in terms of how do we break this down, right? This child is just jumping into the lap of everyone they see. And that's, a safety concern and socially inappropriate behavior. So what is it that they don't know? So we teach them, hey, this is where our family can be. This is where our friends can be. This is where strangers need to be. And we work on rewarding appropriate sitting, standing, based on what a person is, if that makes sense. So reinforcing and making sure that they're gaining access to reinforcement for appropriate behavior is really critical. A child who will just crawl into the lap of anyone may be seeking attention. So if they are standing at an appropriate distance, we'll want to give lots of praise, lots of attention for appropriate behavior. Initially, a lot of it at first, and then fading it out. The other thing that we can teach paired with this is a verbal cue. When we show them this visual, we can also say space, and then they learn to self-correct. And then we can, even if we're out in public and we don't have our visual, we say space, and they know exactly where to go. And I think another part of the personal space was also running away. And we see this a lot, but running away has a lot of different reinforcers. Some kids run away to escape the situation or a task. Some run away because they want you to chase them, and they laugh the whole time. I once had a client who ran away for the sensation of running. And so it's really important to identify why they're running away. And so we can teach them a better way, or to teach them waiting, or to teach waiting. So if they're running away to get something that they want, like they run away at the store, or they run away when they see things, we teach them to request it, and then they can go. Practicing our waiting skills, practicing accepting no, practicing communication are all critical components of that running away. Running away for attention, you would run after them without looking at them and guide them back and give no attention for X amount of time. We always want to reinforce following instructions when it's difficult, and then try to prevent them accessing reinforcement for running away. And this can be really difficult. If they're running towards the playground, you beat them there and don't allow access to the equipment and guide them back to where they were, right? They're not going to get reinforcement for running. Again, if we're going to use extinction, you may need help in certain situations. Mask wearing and social distancing. So with social distancing, this kind of goes along with that personal space, and we can use that cue of space to practice. We can modify our little card here with stranger space on it and have us, stand 2 arms lengths away, or teach them to kind of judge that 6 feet. And then if we respond appropriately, we get reinforcing that cooperation. And you can always fade out reinforcement so that you are not having to provide that praise constantly and then forgetting and seeing the behavior return to 0 occurrences. Reinforcing mask wearing. Some things I've seen work for children is if they can have a hand in choosing what kind of mask they get. There's a lot of different choices, masks that are like bandanas or kind of like scarves that are maybe more comfortable, or have fun colors on them, or things that will make them less aversive than these scary black ones. And then we can always, offer reinforcement for wearing our mask. And we can require really short periods of wearing our mask at first, and then increase that time. So we can say, okay, if you wear that for 5 seconds, you can have your special reward. And then they do it, we're really excited. And the next time it's 10 seconds, then it's a few minutes, and increase the time requirements as the child learns to tolerate it and pairs it with positive things. Functional communication, we have talked about this a little bit. It's really important when you're trying to teach a person to request something that we not give it to them unless they request it. So if a person learns that I don't have to always request this, they won't. It's a higher effort behavior, especially for people who struggle with expressive language. We need to recognize that speaking takes a high amount of effort. And so if they can do anything else to get what they want, they probably will. So requiring the response is critical. And then again, we need to start where a person's at. If they can't speak in sentences, require a word. If they can't use words, require a sign. If they can't do the specific sign, require, whatever they can do. We also want to teach them words that will directly result in reinforcement. So this is about being specific. So if you teach a person to request help, that's really good, and it will result in reinforcement in certain situations. But if they learn to say help for everything, then we don't actually know what they need, and we'll need to teach them more specific things. If they're requesting help when they want a treat, we have no idea what they want. So be as specific as possible when teaching the word that we want them to say. And then, contriving the environment, teaching other people what that communication response means, and making sure that the person is going to access reinforcement for using that from everyone, especially at first, until that response is really strong. Social anxiety was a question, and anxiety in general, from a behavioral perspective, is caused and strengthened by avoidance. So with anxiety, if we avoid something, we're reinforced and we are rewarded with escape. And so that our behavior of avoiding becomes stronger. So we avoid more often. And that can become so severe that we can't face things at all. So one of the best ways to prevent that, right, is to not give that reinforcement for escape, and to instead try to make going and facing it as reinforcing as possible. Some things that help our clients with that desire to avoid is to build their social skills before they go out and have to interact with people, so that they have a plan and know what to do and what to say and how to respond in common situations. We can also use a lot of priming and say, okay, we're going to go here, and this is what we're going to expect. And remember that you have the skills to deal with this. And then we want to make sure that they receive reinforcement for going out, for trying. And that reinforcement could be, you only have to stay for a short amount of time if you go and act, and you try it. So those are ways to kind of counteract that anxiety. Of course, anxiety is also considered, from a medical standpoint, a medical and mental health condition. And to that aspect of it, I cannot speak to or advise. But from a behavioral standpoint, the functions of reinforcement and punishment are kind of here and what I would suggest. Regulating emotions, again, also straying kind of into the realm of mental health, but and not behavioral health, but some things that we work with our clients who struggle with this on our, excuse me, sorry. I need to be quicker with that mute button. Learning to identify emotions. Sometimes we don't even have the words and we can't even recognize what it is that we're feeling, especially in our maybe younger kids or kids who have no experience with trying to have emotional conversations. We don't even know how. So the things that are helpful are practicing with other people, role playing, video modeling. There are a lot of free social skill videos and resources out there that you can watch videos together and say, what was this person, feeling? You can try to, show emotions of your own and have them identify them. Getting a lot of practice and getting really comfortable talking about emotions and identifying them. Identifying them in other people is often easier for our clients at first. Using visuals to help facilitate communication. So we have a lot of different visuals here. For our younger kids, these little faces can be really helpful, and pairing it with colors and where we're at. And sometimes it's easier to say, I'm a 3 right now, than to say, I'm feeling a little bit bugged, you know? And so we can try to pair it with colors and numbers and faces to try to ease the difficulty of communicating these things. When we get to our older kids, you know, explaining exactly, you know, what this looks like can be useful. And then down here is self-monitoring. This is for behavior, but we can use this to monitor our own emotions. You know, how do I feel right now? And trying to match it with like what our face is showing us, what our body language is saying. And again, I mean, I'll say it over and over, use reinforcement. This is hard. This is a skill. This is something that doesn't come naturally to a lot of people. And rewarding the effort and the accuracy of identifying the behaviors can be really, really increase them in the future. Finally, somebody asked about sleep training, and that was a little bit beyond the scope of what we're doing, because sleep training can be very complicated. But I was able to find an awesome resource online, totally free, this sleep assessment tool. I've used it with a lot of clients, and it's really, really helped in identifying what is the problem and what are the strategies recommended. So I included the link here, and I'll make sure to send that out. And then I also did a webinar a few months ago on sleep training specifically, and we had great questions that were really interesting, complex cases. And so that might be helpful for you if you're really struggling with the sleeping. Okay, I would love to open it up for questions. Hopefully, let's see, Sylvia is gonna monitor.
Hi. If you have questions, please feel free to type them in the chat box right here, and I'll go ahead and we'll start here. This was emailed in from a parent. My son doesn't seem to remember getting in timeout or losing screen time. When he doesn't listen or destroys things, he gets really mad when he loses out on something for making a bad choice, but then he's mad for about 1 minute and he doesn't seem to care about it anymore.
So what is the, you say he gets really mad. Can you read it again? That was a lot of information. I'm trying to.
My son doesn't seem to remember getting in timeout or losing screen time. When he doesn't listen or destroys things, he gets very mad when he loses out on something for making bad choices, but then he's mad for about 1 minute and he doesn't seem to care anymore.
Okay, I mean, I have a lot of questions. Does the child or person exhibit a lot of like difficulty with retaining information and, you know, memory?
The background that I'm familiar with, this is for a parent that has a 5-year-old with very high functioning autism, hyperlexia autism. So super smart, but he's struggling with some behavior and social challenges and with his behavior in those areas.
So the consequences will need to be really, really immediate. And then right after that, you'll want to process with him and practice with him. You know, what did we learn? And then also the timeouts and the taking items and things like that are punishment procedures. And as a parent, I find them very useful because they're quick and they are effective, but people habituate very quickly to punishment. And so we will then have to make it more intense and more intense and more intense. So learning to kind of reframe that and say, we're trying to earn this, and using visuals to show, hey, we've earned X, Y, and Z. We only have 1 left. Making that kind of as visual as possible. And, you know, also in that kind of situation where we don't remember the consequence, we don't remember what we did, we don't remember how all these things connect together, self-monitoring can be really helpful as well.
Okay, great, thank you. This is a question from the same parent. Should my child with special needs have different discipline and consequences than their typical siblings that don't have special needs, and how do I explain that to the siblings?
So again, consequences are very individual, but I've found with my own children with special needs versus my neurotypical children, and with my clients as well, they all say that raising a child with disabilities or with, you know, autism is very different because they don't respond the same way to things like punishment procedures or to your anger. Right, my child with autism, I could be really mad, yelling at him, and he'll just be like smiling because he's getting attention, and he's not recognizing. I'm sorry about that. He's a little. He's not recognizing that like me being angry is a bad thing. So yes, I would try really hard to try to create positive strategies for that child. You can change it so that it is the same for all of your children. Positive reinforcement is effective, but I find that most children understand that my brother thinks different than I do, and things have to be different for him, and that needs to be okay, and that we have differences, and we can celebrate that, and we can also recognize that a person who has a different way of thinking might need to be treated a little bit differently. And kids are pretty understanding.
Okay, great. Thank you. Our next question here is from an adult with special needs. What suggestions do you have for an adult to use with a visual to correct attention-seeking behavior, especially at work or when at home?
It would depend on what kind of attention-seeking behavior. If you could be a little bit more specific, that would help, because attention-seeking behaviors could look a lot of different ways. So if you can be a little more specific and put a little, maybe an example in the chat, we could talk more in depth about that.
Okay, we have an example for getting frustrated and running away and not wanting to really use words to express those emotions, but to go run and hide.
And this is an adult. Are there people in the environment that can help, or are you on your own?
I would like to ask, Taylor, do you mind unmuting your microphone and getting on here on chat that might, or on speaker instead of on the chat?
Okay, I'm unmuted.
Hi, I can hear you.
Hi. For me, like right now, I'm not been doing that at all. I'm not right now. But in the past, I had. But the issues I have to say is sometimes a child will struck at me at my job site, and they will like hit and kick and bite and yell at me, and I don't know what to do. Is one. And two is I do ask for help. I do. It's just I don't know how to use it as well, because sometimes they will like they will defend the child and not myself.
That's really hard. I think in those situations, there's a lot of different things you can do. We encounter in what I do a lot of adults who are uncomfortable working with children who engage in physical aggression, and as a employer, I have to respect that some people are not comfortable with that, and that they may need extra support, extra training, and it may be that they are not suited to work with those children, and that's okay. And so those are things you can ask for, and just say, if you want me to work with these kids, I need X, Y, Z. You know, be assertive and state what you need, and recognize what you need as well. That I can't be put in these situations where I'm uncomfortable if I don't feel supported. So either support me or remove me from the situation. And as a boss, you know, I would listen to that and respect that from my employee, no matter who they were.
Great, thank you. Our next question here from the chat. My son gets stuck on asking for things. Even after I say no, he will still ask continually for that same item.
Yes. So this is, I have a lot of clients who do this, and they do it because eventually they wear you down and they get it, and they get what they're asking for. And when we try not to give in, then they up it, and it's a really long period of time. So I would say, decide and set aside time and just say, absolutely not, we're not getting this. And then work on your skills like accepting no and waiting for the item. And if you would like some ideas on how to structure that skill development, I would be happy to send over some resources.
Okay, great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Our next question here from the chat. My daughter laughs out of control. She'll try to trip her elderly grandmother. She's 11. Could she be going through puberty and that's causing some more difficult behaviors? I'm struggling.
Yeah. So again, we would want to, I can't say for sure about puberty. I'm definitely not a medical doctor or expert, but behaviorally, the reason that we engage in behavior is that we receive a reinforcement. So there's something about tripping her grandmother that is really rewarding for her. So whatever that is, we need to identify the function, right? Is she getting access to a lot of attention, or is she getting a lot of reprimands, a lot of shocked outrage, you know? And if that's the case, how can we get her attention that she wants and needs without her having that problem behavior? Can we teach her appropriate replacements, like saying, hey, will you guys play with me? Will you interact with me? Will you talk with me? Instead of engaging in that. And we can also do things like rewarding not doing that, right? So an 11-year-old, I don't know how high functioning she is, but you can create a behavior contract and say, if I go, 3 days with zero times doing this, I get XYZ, and slowly make that requirement more and more difficult. Like I have to go 5 days, I have to go a week, I have to go 2 weeks without tripping anyone or, doing anything that's going to harm another person.
Okay, great. Our next question from the chat. My 4-year-old with Down syndrome wants to shake things for a sensory need whenever she's bored or wants to avoid work. If I am not constantly engaging her, she seems this self-stimulating behavior, but she zones out while doing it. I don't want her to get stuck on this behavior, but I never get a break. Any suggestions to help extinct this behavior?
I think that it would be helpful to identify, how much of shaking things, and I'm not sure like shaking things like shaking a rattle or, how much is okay for you and how much is okay for your child, and discriminating like this is the time you can do this and this is the time you can't, and start to, reinforce those times that we're not shaking things. And trying to offer replacement, right? We can shake something that doesn't make any noise. We can shake something, finding items that are appropriate to do that. I'm just trying to think about a person getting stuck on a behavior. So that behavior is not dangerous and it's not, a severe behavior, but I understand we don't want it to occur at such high rates that the child can't learn. So what I would do is find out how that's interfering with daily life and how that's causing a problem, and then try to reinforce lower rates of that behavior.
Okay.
Sensory behaviors are hard. They're really hard. They require a lot of blocking.
And then we're just almost at our hour here. So this is the last question here from the chat. Actually, there's 2 questions. Is that okay if we take the last 2?
Yes.
One just came in. Okay. My child with Down syndrome is nonverbal. She hits people for attention, to have fun, to get them to play with her. She doesn't do it at home anymore because we're immune to her. She does it with new people who she wants to engage with. And I can't prepare everyone for her.
Mm-hmm. So we would want to teach and reinforce as much as possible appropriate attention seeking, right? Tapping a person instead of hitting them. And then, you can generalize this to other people by coaching people beforehand where you can and say, hey, I want you to come help me with this. Ignore this person until they use their appropriate strategy. And then reinforce, like give them a lot of really fun attention when they are appropriate. And if you work on that with multiple people in the environment, new people, bring over someone that this person hasn't seen in a while, you can see that behavior. She'll learn that replacement behavior more quickly.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And then here's our last question from the chat. My daughter just turned 11 and ignores any command she is given, like to get ready for the day, come down for meals, do her chores, etc. Mm-hmm. She has become increasingly difficult, and I wonder if it's something along puberty, as her body has already started to change, but she is extremely non-compliant. In the past year, she has become more and more withdrawn and plays more and more with her toys and talks to them and with her fingers instead of interacting with other children even when she has the opportunity.
So for escape behaviors, it's really helpful to create a checklist of what we expect and to provide reinforcement only when that list is done, and giving the child as much control as possible over which tasks to do first or which specific tasks I'm going to do this day, trying to work together to create a list that's going to be appropriate. And then the biggest thing for escape behavior is controlling the reinforcement in the environment. If the person has no reason to complete those tasks, they're not going to do it. I mean, if my work stopped paying me or my boss stopped praising me, would I keep working? I mean, I love what I do, so that's not a very good example. But for some people in some jobs, if they stop receiving their reinforcement, then they would quit, of course. So finding a way to reinforce the behavior that you want to see is really important. And for the social stuff, there's a lot of social skill programs. There's a lot of social skill groups out there that can help address those withdrawing socially behaviors, and making social interaction a lot more fun than being by ourselves can also be really helpful.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you, Liesl, so much. You mentioned that you had some slides and documents that you'll send over to me, and then I will email that out to the group that's on the RSVP list. So I'll send that out. Also, if you had friends that joined, we will have this recording available later. But I just want to thank everyone for coming, and thank you again, Liesl, for presenting another great, webinar for us. We appreciate you so much for taking the time to do that. And do you want to put your contact information up on the screen one more time in case folks want to follow up with you individually?
Let me, yeah, 1 second.
I can also just send it out in the email. It'll be in the slides, right?
So to scramble and write it down really fast, sure. And I can send you everything in a couple of minutes.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. We really appreciate you taking the time to present this to our families today. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
All right, have a great day, everyone. Thank you for coming.